All right.
So,
All right. So we're going to talk about the face pull. Now, there are a couple of different ways that we would do this, and I'll show you the way that I prefer to do it. I know that there are other ways that people do it, and I'm going to explain why they would do it and why it's not incorrect, but why the way they're doing it is incorrect. So, in a traditional face pull, you would use pronated grip, overhand grip, and I'm going to show you why I prefer to use this. So we grab that, and we'll use a split stance. Okay. And now, if you think about it, as I drive my elbows back and high, these ropes are an extension of your forearms. So this is a good position of power, and it makes the line of pull a lot better, okay, for working the musculature across the upper back and the scapula, okay? So get a couple of reps with that. So from a strength building perspective, I like this. You have the pulling back and a slight bit of external rotation. That's great. Now, show the grip I hate. That one, okay. So, now pull that the same way. Now, one of the problems with this is that it really affects more the elbow than it does the back. The reason that people started using this grip was to hold it in a neutral grip position. So realistically, hold that again, like you were. That way, when you pull back, you could move into an externally rotated position, which is great. Great as a corrective exercise with a little bit less weight. So let's put a little bit less weight on there and show it. But one of the problems I have with this is you can see there's a good potential for the rope to slap you in the forehead. So while that is a good exercise, it's probably better if you have 2 triceps ropes or a longer rope in order to pull and really rotate into external rotation, which is what that specific type of face pull was made for. So when we talk about a traditional face pull, I always consider that pronated grip, and then we talk about an underhanded face pull or under grip or neutral grip face pull in order to then put you in a position where you can now externally rotate at the top and finish out the external rotation portion of the movement. But just keep in mind that this type of rope is not going to be good for that movement. You might get 2 triceps ropes to go for a longer, because the whole point of that style is to really be able to work on external rotation, which a lot of people need. A lot of people need a lot more external rotation, especially in a elbow or a shoulder extended and scapular tracting depressed position.
so people who, like our gym, for example, doesn't have two ropes.
Yet.
We could say that about every gym though, right? It's like they may not have 2 ropes, or like I've commonly seen is they have ropes that are 2 very different lengths, or different thicknesses or whatever. And I think what would your suggestion be then?
Yeah, my suggestion would do it single armed. And then we have a single rope here. Unfortunately, we don't have 2. Or we have this rope here, like a traditional triceps press-on. So we could use this with the under grip and pulling it into external rotation, work 1 arm at a time. And then after the industry gets uncrazy from COVID and you can actually buy equipment, we'll actually have enough bars to do that. So you could do that, or you could also, one thing I've done is take a yoga strap, and I've run a yoga strap through and use that in order to pull that in that position as well. So just like we've talked about as well on other exercises, it's breaking down all the little components of the movement and making sure that you can retract, depress, and go into shoulder extension while also doing external rotation. So in a lot of cases, people are doing that traditional face pull before they've got the ability to actually externally rotate or pull and combine all that together. So people might want to think about a shoulder abducted external rotation and working that independently of the face pull, and then switching to the neutral grip face pull to combine those together, and at some point going back to the normal pronated grip face pull in order to build strength.
And I think this is similar to what you just mentioned with the yoga strap, is that because I see a lot of people do this with a band, and I think I don't have a problem with the band, but we just got to think about where it's overloading, right? It's like it's always overloading the shortened range. And something that I think it was Jordan Shallow who mentioned, like especially with that type of movement of going into the external rotation, is that people are constantly chasing weight rather than the movement.
Right.
And so if we're thinking about the same way dumbbell external rotation, if you can't do a dumbbell external rotation effectively, you don't add more weight. You try and make sure the movement is better, but you're also thinking about then, what are we using that movement for? That is not our max strength movement, for example. Like that is there as the supplementary exercise to help something else be better. And that is something I think you see often common with face pulls, is that like, just for the purpose of demonstration, if we think about where people set this up, whichever way they may set it up, but then feet aren't in a split stance, and we're massive hyperextension to try and get the rope back, because we're chasing the number of weight, we're chasing the amount of weight on the stack, rather than actually focusing on, can I get the positioning correct?
Correct, right. And so for a lot of people, that might be working on just this movement here and getting it here, and then eventually moving into external rotation, and then switching to a longer rope to go further into external rotation, but earning your exercises and earning the movements. And making sure that you can do all those components of the movement before you actually combine them into one full range. And going off of what you said about what Jordan said, at a Gymnastic Bodies certification seminar that Zoe and I went to, one of the guys asked one of Christopher Sommer's guys, O-Wrench, if you look at mobility and you look at strength, which one is most important first? And O-Wrench said mobility is the most important thing, then strength. Right, and I would tend to agree with that if you don't have full range of motion as something where it's painful or you can't achieve that, it's probably better to get the movement and the technique and the mobility of the movement, then weight it, than to think that chasing strength is going to fix the problem. Because chasing strength in a bad movement pattern or poor mobility is never going to rectify the problem. It's always only going to amplify the problem.
Can we just talk, while we've got this here, your setup? So different people will set that at different heights. Now obviously we've got, for example, the rope rows to throat, rope rows to head, rope rows to nose, all these different variations, as well as seated versions in terms of being on a lat pull down type machine or a seated row machine. What are you setting it up to target in terms of, if someone has, for example, some people notice with a face pull is they notice they get a lot of scapular elevation and they get a lot of overactivation of the neck. So me preferentially, exactly, I would go higher working on more depression.
Yes.
But this is always going to be varying from individual to individual in terms of, I had a chat with one of our clients and they just felt that it just moved a hell of a lot better for them to be going slightly lower and pulling up. They just felt a better level of contraction than then when they needed it higher or lower, whatever it may be.
And here's one of the conundrums of it, right? People will always, especially when you look at the relationship between the lower traps and upper traps, everyone always thinks that their upper traps are hypertonic because they're overworked. And in a lot of cases, they might be underworked and over-shortened in order to carry the rib or the clavicle and the scapula higher. So in a lot of cases, you'll hear people talk about not pulling from this position because they don't want to overwork the traps. But in some cases, that's exactly what the traps need, especially if you're allowing the shoulders to come forward to stretch the traps and then bringing them back up and working them in that range of motion. Right? So in a lot of cases, that can be a very beneficial exercise, and realistically, we need to listen to our clients. If something feels better and it looks better on video or while you're in person training them, then that's probably the right movement for them. And then if we do something like with that client, if we brought this up high and did a kneeling or a seated one for scapular depression, retraction, and working the lower traps, that might feel completely awful for them because it might not be the right exercise for them.
I think I like your cue there is that we think about the rope as an extension of the forearm, because I think it's the same with a lot of lat pull down movements or cable-based movements, is that we tend to lose sight of the forearm or a part of the arm being in line with the cable, and we start to try and move the object as close as we can to the body. And for example, a face pull, we end up dropping the elbows and the wrists end up in kind of like this T-Rex position, trying to just get the thing in as close as we can, rather than thinking about, are we keeping the joints in alignment to maximize that line of pull for the muscle that we're actually trying to target.
I think a lot of clients don't understand, because most of them don't understand anatomy, and I mean, we've been teaching coaches for a long time. Most coaches don't understand anatomy, and they might understand where something originates and inserts, but they don't know how that relationship changes depending on where the joints rotated and sitting and where the bones are rotated and sitting. So if we think about it, when you're, and we kind of said this on another video, I think we're out for coffee, on the row, well, not the row like this, or pull down like this, right? So if you think about it, none of the muscles that you're working when you're doing a row, when you're doing a pull down, none of the things that you're trying to work, which is working around the humerus and working around the T-spine, scapula, humerus, and all this area, none of that's attached to your forearm. So what I like to cue people is forget that this even exists. All this is there for is just hold the weight. And I just want to think about what's really most important, which is taking the elbow from a position in front of the body to behind the body, or on a position of being internally rotated to externally rotated. So we need to consider what are the muscles we're working, what planes are we working in, and what's the most important cues to give those people in order for the client to understand what we're trying to get them to do. So if I tell somebody to just row the bar as far as they want or as they can, they're gonna row and they may stop here for their functional range of motion and think, well, I've heard that the bar is supposed to touch your chest. Arnold Schwarzenegger said the bar needs to touch your titties. So then they'll keep pulling and now it becomes a completely different movement. And in a lot of cases it becomes a faulty movement and ends up creating long-term pathologies.
And something is you just mentioned on the client side as well is that clients don't have an awareness necessarily of what muscles to recruit. And I think that's where sometimes teaching positioning in the sense of, okay, if they can't feel something, teaching them, okay, your forearms, for example, elbow to wrist, then wrist to the cable, that should all be just one straight line. That's all we need you to focus on, because for a lot of us, and I know I was the same way when I started training, is that when I first came through the Muscle Nerds program design, is that you remember with Cedric Rose, for example, I thought I was engaging my lats, but I was very over rear delt dominant. But for me is the association of, well, I think I can feel my lats, I can't see them, therefore the movement must be correct, right? And I think that's where for a lot of our clients is that visually they work what they can see.
Yeah.
So if they can see the rope as an alignment, then that's going to first ingrain the right movement pattern, because they can't see anything on their back. So they don't know, am I working my rear delts, I don't know what part of my back I'm working. So if they know the movement's set up correct, then that starts to associate what they're feeling in terms of what they see.
Right, because a lot of times their brain will give them faulty feedback on what's actually really happening. So we'll have people all the time that'll squat and you go, how'd that feel to you? And they go, oh, it felt wonderful. And then you show them the video of them squatting and they're like, holy shit. And they're surprised at how twisted and rotated and shifting they are, because their brain, that's a natural, normal movement pattern for them because they've been doing it for so long. So those kind of cues, and like when we teach the cable split squat, okay, why do we like the cable split squat? Well, the cable gives you a guideline to move like an escalator instead of an elevator, so it guides people in that escalator pattern instead of them doing this, right? So those little cues and those little implements can move people in the right direction to then reinforce their brain how it's supposed to feel, to where they should be able to do actual movement with their eyes closed. That's all I got.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right.